Since it's the season of the supernatural, it's equally a pleasure and a chore to review a game that dares to stray from the accepted norms. Capcom instinctively knew that Gregory Horror Show was destined to be filled under quirky by unsympathetic retailers already, and has been canny enough to release it in 2003 by a couple of bucks. But in today's standards, the game has achieved the place of hidden gem, and finding one is kinda like selling your soul to the devil. It's weird that Capcom has sold this game to a confused but intrigued public after something a bit different, and not resorting to another Resident Evil game. But is that enough to coax your moth-eaten wallet out into the open air to find this hidden gem? Glancing at the gameplay, it's obvious this isn't your standard game, featuring a blockhead cast of strange individuals based on the Japanese cartoon series. And I'm pretty sure that someone would give us a thesis on this show. It's a halfway house between the survival horror title and the lighthearted puzzle-solving narrative field adventures that LucasArts was famed for. Think for example Grim Fandango gnawing on Raccoon City's bones, and you're somewhere close to it.
Now I'm really hangry.
The game revolves around the simple premise that you're wandered into the Gregory house. Or, so we can say it, a hotel in a chaotic world. And you can't get out. You're trapped by Gregory, an old rat who happens to also be the eccentric manager of the candlelit hostelry. Seriously, how many candles this guy can get? Bizarrely, and bizarre is the byword for the entire game, Death has offered you a way back into the real world by tasking you with retrieving the lost souls that populate the place. I'm still thinking is why we have a Swedish and an Italian Death at the same time. It's just weird, okay? Trouble is, each of these souls is held by one of the deranged hotel guests, who, and for some reason not fully explained, are keeping these souls from themselves. The game therefore involves wrenching these back from these weirdos and delivering them back to the Grim Reaper one by one. But in true Capcom adventure style, that's never as easy as it initially appears. Presented in a familiar third-person action-adventure style, the game borrows plenty of gameplay mechanics from the Resident Evil series, and on that basis could be considered a surreal survival horror offspring. Much like any other game in that subgenre, the idea is to wander around collecting seamlessly unconnected objects, book fragments, health-promoting herbs, and, most crucially, spy on the oddball occupants as much as possible, while they're going about their business when they're sleeping or when they're just having a little thing to themselves. We need to find out what makes them tick, their weaknesses, their thoughts on the other guests, and ultimately how to get the souls off them. The first two souls you collect are a little more than an exercise in introducing the simple mechanics of being observant, scoring the rooms for clues, and putting a plan into action. Most of the game's information comes from basically spying on what everyone's up to by hitting the button and peeing into the keyholes to listen into their thoughts on their random mutterings. Each entry is logged into your personal memo. Then it's up to you to piece together the clues to work out how to wrestle the ill-gotten soul away from them. Sometimes you can simply talk to the guests directly to find out what they want. For example, Neko Zombie, the hungry undead cat with the stitch-up mouth, is desperate for some food, while others such as the vindictive nurse Catherine have no intention of letting go of their souls and need upsetting in some way to get it back. I'm beginning to get scared of hospitals right now, if you have nurses like that. While Gregory Horror Show shares its basic mechanics and control system with other survival horror titles, that's more or less where the similarities end, with the emphasis firmly on puzzle solving rather than shooting monsters. But despite the lack of hand-to-hand actions, you still have an energy bar of sorts. In this case, you have a mental gauge, which constantly takes down, and it's your prime concern to stop this from being eroded to nothing. Naturally, in an hotel full of freaks, that's no easy task. especially when most of the occupants are intent of chasing after you. Should they try to catch you up, or should you inevitably run into them, the game cuts up to a brief horror show, and a big chunk of your mental energy is lost in the process. Reading books, eating, and drinking stave off the progression elements of being subjected to the constant madness. But if you're not careful with the onset of tiredness, headaches, nervousness, confusion, melancholy, and darkness elements can dramatically impair your general performance. Not only does your facial expression change, but the ability to see deteriorates, and the misery piles up. The liver soul though, and all those ills magically disappear, but if your mental gauge ebbs down to 0, there's no escape and it's practically a game over.
Hey, you don't look so good. Here, this'll fix you right up.
For all the quirky gameplay, the visuals add an even more unhinged hair to the proceedings. For some inexplicable reason, everyone in the Gregory house has a massively disproportionate square head, bemused expression, and tiny legs, in case you hadn't quite noticed yet. Assuming it's something to do with the deranged mind of the cartoon illustrators, I'll instead appreciate the fact that it's something different and reveal in its intricacies. In the context of the game, it works very well indeed, and despite their basic appearance, deliberate lack of texturing and limited animation, it's a joy moving through the game just to find out who you're going to encounter next. Part of the cast's effortless charm is their sheer comical nature, but arguably it's the voiceovers that do the trick. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that actually this game has voiceovers? What's next? Check out the purring maniacal tones of Neko's zombie screeching for food and vowing revenge, or the wicked giggles of James, Gregory's inaccessibly plotting son. It's the first cartoon adventure since Green Fandango where you get most of the fun just listening to what the motley crew have to say next. It's a shame then that Capcom doesn't quite manage to do as much justice to the puzzles, which after the first few, they get quite petty in their structure. With kinda 20 by 20 hindsight, they're all logical, but many rely on your ability to retain obscure pieces of information. Otherwise, you can literally find yourself wandering around in circles for hours before you make progress. It's this crushing sense of rigid linearity that takes away a lot of the potential fun within Gregory's horror house, and the puzzles that simply require you to be in the right place at the right time are just, well, mean. There are always clues to be had, but each puzzle is very different to the next, so you can easily find yourself barking up the wrong tree if your mind's not on the same lateral path as the game designers. Another obstacle is the fact that while you're busy playing Sherlock Holmes, the game constantly delights in tripping you with its little horror shows. The first few times Nurse Catherine takes a blood sample are amusing, but by the later part of the game you're just fed up with having to run all over the place to escape these fiends. Just as you're about to glean a vital clue with some slutty spying, one of the inmates will appear out of the room and dash after you. It's tiring, taxing, and drains your will to continue. Strictly in terms of its puzzles, Gregory Horror Show will appeal to all those that enjoy adventures, and that's everything from Silent Hill to Monkey Island. Admittedly, they're often petty in their exacting nature, but like all the best adventures, you always feel that warm sense of satisfaction once you crack them, if you have the patience required to work through them. But such is the quality of the humor and characterization, this is one of the few games you can get away with cheating and will walk through and still enjoying it. But if you don't want to use a walkthrough, that's up to you. Take away the frustration factor and it's a far more compelling game for it. I just wish that Capcom had perhaps taken a leaf out of Konami's Silent Hill book and offered a variety of combat and puzzle skill levels, so that it would be possible to avoid resorting to just hiding and running. Personally, I could have done without being chased for 50% of the game. It's tricky enough as it is. Although it's peppered with a few fundamental niggles that detract from the overall experience, Gregory Horror Show is without question a charming adventure that will have you beaming at its dementedness. I gotta give congratulations to Capcom for spawning the fact that this wouldn't have worked at full price. At $20 or something, it's definitely well worth a punt if you have a literal mind and you're thirsty for something slightly left field. If only every publisher could be so experimental like Gregory Horror Show. And with that said, happy Halloween, everyone. Don't let the mouse fool your mind. It could be a really horror show.